August 21st, 2019 is called to order. If you would please repeating the pledge of allegiance. I thank you. Clerk, if you will please read the roll.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Campana?
Here.
Commissioner Frazier?
Here.
Commissioner Hill?
Here.
Commissioner Schlegel?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Reynolds? And Mayor Stonehouse.
Here. Mayor Pro Tem Reynolds is running late and will be here at 4 o'clock. I don't know whether that engenders that we need to have a motion to delay her, or we just by consensus will wait until she appears. Yes. Okay. By consensus, we will wait. Roll call is conducted. There is an agenda in front of you. A motion for approval. Commissioner Smith,
I move that we approve the agenda as written.
is there a second? Campana?
I second that.
Any further comments from either motion maker? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed by no? Motion passes 6-0. The only announcement I will make is to request that the presenters do so in a succinct and focused fashion, so we can keep the meeting moving along directly without undue delay. That said, public comments. Comments may not exceed 3 minutes per person. Please state your name and physical address when making public comments. Seeing none, public comments are closed. That brings us to the consent agenda. Commissioners, if I may have a motion on the consent agenda. Commissioner Campana?
I would move that we adopt the consent agenda as stated.
Is there a second? Commissioner Schlegel?
Second.
Motion makers, any further comments?
None.
Seeing none, any other commissioner? None. All those in favor signify by saying yes. Yes. Any opposed by no. Hearing none, motion passes 6-0. That brings us to new business, and that will be item number 2, the Community Development Engineering, Planning, Zoning, and Road Safety. I turn that over to the staff.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. I do have a couple of housekeeping items to take care of before we get into the meaty part of the budget. But from the last budget session, which was the John Swinson show, John did provide a couple of answers that we weren't able to provide at the time. One question was on page 111 on the fact sheet where it showed the rental that the rowing club was paying. The amount that's showing for the current year is correct. It's the one in the previous years that are not correct. So it should be $2,280 per year. But the way it was shown, it looked like it jumped from like, I don't know, $600 to $2,200. But the $2,200 is the correct amount for each year. He did provide a corrected fact sheet for page 159, and I put that at your desk. And he also said that there were some questions regarding the September 7th fishing tournament at Presque Isle Marina. And he does say that the contractor has confirmed the launch will be open for the event, and South Shore Fishing Association has been made aware. So there shouldn't be any issues there. I also provided you, this morning I was sent the Peter White Public Library budget. Their board approved that last night, and I sent that out in an email, and it's also at, excuse me, it's also at your desk. I didn't put page numbers on it because we didn't have any assigned, so you can just put that at the tail end of your budget book if you so desire. And then last but not least, but happy birthday to the mayor. Today's his birthday, and he's celebrating by sitting here doing a budget. So thank you.
Which is why I have the request for
Yes.
veracity
So we have
of the
added
presenters.
motivation to get out of here. And with that, well, you all know Dennis and Keith, and I'll let them start out.
Meeting adjourned. I'll try my best not to go, but. Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to present the community development budget. I'm just gonna talk for 1.5 minutes here on the Community Development Department rather than go through each one of these and talk about our functions. At its core, what the Community Development Department does is takes ideas, designs them, builds them, and then hands them off to the rest of the city for implementation. We facilitate the planning process through community and public participation. We provide staff liaison to the Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and other entities like that, including the Downtown Development Authority. So we help build the ideas, shape them, then our engineering department designs most of them, oversees the construction of them, and then within our code enforcement division in the zoning department, we kind of provide a checks and balance on the private side of things to ensure that we have a very healthy, safety, and happy community. With that, I'd like to jump into our engineering department fact sheet. It is page 101 in your budget book, and it briefly talks about the engineering division of community development. I won't touch much on the primary functions because I hit those in a nutshell for community development. We do have revenue applicable to our account. The revenue includes some permits for use of the right-of-way and the off-street parking permits. We didn't have any grants this year. Along with that, we do sell maps and we rent equipment. And over the course of the past couple of years, heading into next year, that number seems to be pretty consistent as far as our revenue. Moving over to page 102, we talk about our authorized positions that you will see. We have 2.5 leadership positions myself, part of my time dedicated there. And then, of course, we have a city engineer that provides oversight to all of the engineering division staff and the assistant city engineer that helps them with that. The rest of the fellows underneath there are various engineering technicians, staff engineers, aides and inspectors, and all of those folks help design projects, and also they're the folks that you see on the street when the construction project is going on. They're doing the inspecting and being good representatives of the city on those projects. The next section would be with our program statistics. Basically, it just talks about in linear feet the utilities that we've replaced or extended, streets that we've reconstructed or overlaid, sidewalks that we've repaired or extended, multi-use pathways, and then the number of permits that are issued. If there are no questions on program statistics, I'll move on to our fee schedule. Most of these program statistics come from, just a quick note on that, they come from the capital improvements plan. So when the city commission approves the capital improvements plan, most of these are included in those projects that are being approved in the capital improvements plan, such as our sidewalk replacement schedule, our what we call the SIMP or heavy maintenance type of items, the mills and overlays and things along those lines. Moving into page 103 on the fee schedule, we do not have any drastic increases this year. We took Gary's guidance and went with the percentage of increase for each one of those fees. And all of those are highlighted in bold that were applied the modest increase percentage. And moving on to page 104, which is the actual expenditures for the upcoming year. The only things that I'd really like to note in these, most of these are pretty standard operating procedures, whether it's operating supplies or repair and maintenance supplies, where things come in as professional and contractual. We like to budget $10,000 in there for any unanticipated consulting services. That may be a situation where we're reconstructing on a street and we find something in the field that could be environmental or needs some special consulting services, then we would look to have that money cover something along those lines. We are going to recalibrate our survey and GPS equipment this year, which is going to provide
Catch 'em at the end.
funding from the operating and maintenance supplies will provide for that. And other than that, I don't have much else to present. Are there any questions on engineering?
The, thank you, the succinct, that's great. And the retirement is taking up a big portion of the budget, and I wondered how long that is going to be the case. Can you anticipate, I mean, not that everyone should live a healthy, long life, but.
Yeah. If
or
you'll
may-
recall, Susan addressed that at the first session, but we are getting hit hard by MERS. We do have quite a bit of underfunded liability, and right now, I believe they have everybody on a 20-year amortization, so you can kind of think of that as a 20-year bond payment. But that also includes the current liability. I don't have the breakdown of what is what, but that's the total. And, you know, as we talked about too, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but a lot depends on the investment returns that we get each year.
And I guess, is there more people in this department too? Like, is that part of what's driving this number? Are there more people? I mean, the number hasn't been this large in any of the other things that we've seen.
Include retirees, right?
Yeah, this also includes retirees and that kind of a thing, but on the fact sheet, it lists the number of people in this department. So if you go back to page 101, that shows the number of staff
Right.
that's in this department.
Is this the biggest department in the city? Or,
No, it's not the biggest, but it is a bigger one than probably what you've been seeing up to now.
okay. Oh, all right.
Anyone else? Thank you.
No further questions? Okay, I'm gonna move on to page 108, which, this will cover our planning and zoning and code enforcement divisions of community development. And these are the folks that, 105. Thanks for the catch. See, I got ahead of myself. Through our planning, we do have a revenue that comes through planning and zoning, both dealing with permits. They're listed as non-business permits and fees, but those essentially are all permits that come through the department. We do have one grant coming through this year that was a carryover from some work with the Land Development Code. And we also take in some fines and fees for civil infractions. As far as the authorized positions, I'm part-timer in this one. Then we have our city planner and zoning administrator, which is David Stensis, and then Ann is our administrative assistant. We have planning commission meetings that we act as staff liaison for. We attend the 41 corridor group. We do assign addresses and name streets, and we also issue municipal property license. If somebody builds something on the right-of-way or like a fence in a right-of-way, we prepare those license applications and do all the vetting and groundwork on that. Moving on to page 106, this is the zoning division. We have planning and zoning technician, which used to be called the code enforcement official for a number of years, but 2 years ago that was changed to planning and zoning technician, so that position we could get more bang for the buck with them working on things other than just code enforcement. We have our zoning official, Andrea Landers, and then part-time administrative assistants on that. You can see we've had a pretty steady uptick in zoning compliance and sign and fence permits. However, the number of BZA cases have gone down so far this year, which is really good news for the Land Development Code. It means that it's working, when the variances go down. Site plan reviews, most of the permits are just generally up in nature because of we've just got a lot of activity going on here in the city. Moving on to page 107 is the fee schedule for the planning department. All of the fees on here reflect the increase that was recommended by Gary for a percentage increase. With the planning department fees, there are no new fees added. On page 108, we have the Board of Zoning Appeals and our actual zoning fees. A majority of the fees here received the application of the percentage increase, and there was one fee that went away, which is for the sidewalk sign. That was eliminated, a permit for that in the land development code, and then the sign permit fee had a percentage increase. We did away with residential interior remodeling, and then the fee actually went down for square footage, so there's some decent savings on that. And then the biggest one that was added due to the land development code is we now have permits for limited animal keeping, so bees, chickens, rabbits, all of those things. But other than that, it's just a percentage increase. And then moving on to page 109, which is our planning and zoning expenditures. There's only a couple things to note in here, and that would be our 801 account, professional and contractual. We are requesting $12,500 this year. That reflects $7,500 for our meeting transcription of the planning commission meetings. And then we had, the city commission had authorized us to purchase the software for the website for the land development code, which we just, almost up and running. We did some internal training on it today, and we'll be ready to go live with that in about another week or so. That license is $4,000 a year, and then we budgeted $1,000 for technical support. So,
Dennis. 740 operating supplies.
yes.
What's the deal? Nothing there, and all of a sudden 1,500.
Yeah, it's a brand new created account for us. Yeah, it's an account that is newly created for fiscal year 2020. And that account basically covers the electronics that we have, our mobile electronics for our department.
If it's new, we did it in 2018.
A lot of those costs used to be captured under the line item just above that, 727 office supplies. And because there is a difference between office supplies and operating supplies, we just separated that out so that the department managers can better manage their budgets that way.
Makes sense.
Maybe this goes back to planning, I'm not sure. With the land development code revision and the ability to make things that much easier to process, going through the setups and less variances, I guess, and more information online for people to access themselves a lot cleaner instead of having to come in and have things interpreted to them. Would you anticipate that the 2020 estimated revenue would be lower because of those efficiencies? And then also
Only in certain areas.
Okay.
It will be lower in the smaller stuff, the fences, the signs, and the residential, I'm gonna put a deck in the backyard, those type of things. But anything above and beyond that is gonna be of the same magnitude previously.
So that, I guess my point would be is that even if there's less revenue coming in, it's less
It will balance
less
itself
man-hours,
out.
so it's going to balance itself out.
It will balance itself out, yes.
Thank you.
Just newbie, we're renting office space?
Yes.
Where Is that anticipated to continue, or is that a
That's-
temporary thing?
We have the Municipal Service Center, which we operate as a internal service fund, which means we have to collect rents from each user department to
Okay.
fund its operations.
Okay, I just didn't know.
It's not from an outside agency,
that-
we just rent from ourselves.
Yeah, understood.
Well, there's about curb cuts. Is there, like, you have to go into talk to you guys about getting a curb cut? I know, but Ed's boathouse needs a curb cut possibly, because when they redid Lake Shore, the curb extends a little too far, so it's been a pain, and then possibly our house and live in it now, so you just go and tell them what you wanna do and file a permit, or
Curb cuts will require a permit, yes.
what's the fee for the permit? I mean, obviously, you gotta get a contractor that's good for the city to do it, but
86? That falls under engineering.
something.
The curb cut permit, I believe, was $86. Oh, 140. 140.
So we can take him out and just bring him to Mike's house, or what? Bring him out, just take him out and put him in Mike's office, or what?
Nope.
And then last is just a comment in endorsing the training for the Planning Commission and BZA. I know that's something that they were interested in, so I'm glad to see that in there. Thank you.
Nothing further? Thank you.
All right, one last one. Road Safety Fund. This is basically the Lundin money that applies to Wright Street. It is page 154. Actually, I'm gonna take you right to 155, because this account is, it's basically an account that's held where the money comes in from Lundin, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but you take that money and apply it to pay off a bond that we issued.
Yes, that is correct. This has come up before, so up on the screen, I didn't have a handout, but I put it up on the screen. Back in May of 2014, the city and Eagle Mine entered into an agreement to help us take care of our roads that their trucks use. And so the agreement started September 2014, and it's an 8-year agreement. Basically, what the agreement says is that they will pay us $500,000 a year for road maintenance, and then an additional $200,000 a year for road safety. And there's an additional clause, and that's to take place over 8 years, so we will receive that through 2022. And that's what we're using to pay the bond. There were a couple of roundabouts put in that area, and that's what we use. We issue a bond, and we're using that money to pay that portion of the bond. Now, there's an additional clause that says beginning of September of 2018 through September 2022, so a 4-year period, we are to, let me see if I can get the exact wording here. So paragraph 4 here, it gets into if there's an alternate route built, or if the mine gets out of the agreement entirely. But if they don't, they're to accrue over a 4-year period an additional $2.7 million, which is roughly $675,000 per year. And that money is to be used to reconstruct Sugarloaf and Wright Street. Now, there are several outs in this agreement, and if they get out of the agreement now, that $2.7 million will be prorated. And as far as I know, there's not an alternate route that was built. So they will start accruing $675,000 per year. And at the end of the term, if everything is still in good standing, we'll send them a bill for that $2.7 million, which will allow us to reconstruct Sugarloaf and Wright Street.
So Gary, even if they, just a question, I know there's been talking about them possibly offloading the limestone, stuff like that at the We Energies plant, because they then the boats can just fill it with or they're done. So they're going, the trucks don't go back far from Sheriff's Park. But so even if they didn't go from, you know, Lower Harbor up to the mine and back down the road, and they just go right from Wieners up Big Bay and come back, they still the PFA actually go from Big Bay through back up the road and go up to the mine. So unless they punch a hole through the woods or something like that, that's the only way they get out of it or something.
They're on the hook for this until they terminate the agreement. There is a termination clause, but so far they haven't done that. So even if they don't use it and they don't terminate the agreement, they still have to pay us for that.
So basically, even if they decide they can punch a hole, somebody in the government lets them punch a hole through the road and drive to the woods to deliver their stuff, they still have to pay, so.
That's how I interpret it. Now, it might be something to ask the city attorney if that ever happened, how that would be interpreted. But as far as the bean counters, we say they owe the money.
If there are no further questions, thank you for your time. That completes community development.
Thank you.
Next, we get into more the mixed bag of public works and utilities. So we'll ask Scott, Eric, and Kurt to come to the table. And I believe Mark's going to join us too. We'll let Kurt introduce Mark. I'm not sure if everybody knows Mark, but we'll let Kurt do that.
Mayor, is it on? Yeah, it should be. Mayor, Commissioners, it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, this will be my last budget presentation. I promise. But no, I have not announced any date, but one date I can say that I won't be here next year for a presentation. But I do want to introduce someone that I've been working with for over 30 years, Mark O'Neill. Mark O'Neill's been with the city, with the department, over 30 years. Mark's been a great attribute for the city. His knowledge of water and wastewater is phenomenal. Mike has certifications with the F1 for drinking water, and then retains a B. So in the budget, as I present the water utilities one, if there's any problems at all, Mark. No, but it was a joint effort on the utilities portion of it. So I just want to introduce Mark O'Neill.
Thank you. And we'll just go in order that we have on the schedule, so people are just going to jump in as their item comes up. So we'll start with City Hall, which is on page 71, and that'll be Eric to start out.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. My name is Eric Steeman. I'm the Director of Facilities and Maintenance for the city. So starting off with City Hall, on page 71, we have the fact sheet there, which is just a summary of the type of work that we do here in City Hall, different repairs, just to keep the building up and running. Going over to the next page, 72, get some more of the meat of it. We have the operating budget. For the most part, we're fairly status quo. We like to do a few projects every year. Last year, we were able to do the large Johnson Control project, which took care of a lot of our needs, a lot of our long-term wants, I guess you should say, and needs as far as maintenance. But this year, coming up, you'll see at the bottom, we have, we're gonna do some work to room 103, because that's in desperate need of it, as everybody knows. And then we're also gonna work on the sidewalk here to the east outside, because it's getting pretty rough, so. That might cost extra. And just to give everybody, we're gonna do a JCI update come end of September, just to let everybody know where we're at. But just to give you an idea, just for this City Hall building, we've about a 25 to 30% reduction in energy with the changes that we've made, so things have gone really well. Are there any questions on City Hall?
Any chance for a roundabout around City Hall?
And then the roof was gonna be when?
I think that's scheduled right now in CIP for 2023,
Okay.
I think.
Hmm.
2022, maybe, somewhere in there.
What was the JCI projection? Were they looking for 25% minimum?
I don't know as if they necessarily nailed it down to each individual building, but we'll have that information come September. We're gonna lay it all out and show you exactly where we're at, where they anticipated us to be, and make sure that we're hitting our mark.
Sounds good.
Okay, see no other questions, moving on to cemetery, page 78. Recently, the cemetery lost retired our arborist and sexton. Didn't really
Where'd he
lose him.
go?
He's happy somewhere, I'm sure. So we have a new sexton / arborist there. He's doing a fine job. You'll see over there on the fact sheet on page 78, we do have some seasonal employees there that maintain the grounds. And then just some statistics as far as what our burials are. One thing that we added new that was just approved in the spring is the green burials, which kind of brings me over to the fee schedule. That was added in on page 79. And you'll notice, I'll bring it up, the green burials are a little bit more, and you're probably wondering why. It's a little bit bigger lot size, because we weren't quite sure how to do it, so we based it on the size of the lot. Typical lot size on a traditional burial is gonna be like a 3'4" by 10 foot lot, whereas green burials, just because of the nature of it, we need to widen them up, so they're gonna be a 5 by 10, which is why we're basing it on the square footage. And then also the interments are gonna be a little bit more, just because they're a lot more labor intensive. You have to physically, lower the body into the hole in a death shroud and things like that, and city personnel will be doing that, so it's a little bit different than what we're used to. So there's been a lot of excitement in the community about offering this, and we're gonna be, as you see when we get into the next page here, page 80, we had to add a few funds in there just to finish our burial mound that we're doing. If you go through the cemetery now, you'll notice there we're calling it Prairie Mound. It's a section in the internal of the cemetery where you can kind of see we're putting that together. It's all plotted out. We got the pins in there. We're gonna have about 230 spaces, so that should last us for some time. We're gonna need, the reason for this additional cost, we need about 800 yards of fill to bring it up. We're able to use quite a bit of what we had just from spoils and things like that, but we're gonna have to bring in a little bit. And then just getting it all prepped, and once it's set to go, it's really gonna be a nice area, and it's gonna be very aesthetically pleasing.
The cost is passed on to the.
Cost is
customer.
passed on, yep, through the sale and through the perpetual care fund.
Especially if you have to dig a hole, instead of just put a box in there, you have to wrap the
Essentially,
person
yeah,
up in a tarp
Essentially,
and then put them there.
they use a death shroud. There's no embalming involved.
Yeah.
They lower it, it's about a 40-inch hole. They lower them in. We're gonna allow family members to assist if they request, because some people like to do that, to assist in the lowering, and then there'll maybe be some ceremonial filling, I guess, if you'd say, to throw some dirt on top. But then after that, that's it. It gets filled in. There's grass on it. There's no memorial. There's anything like that.
Basically, a backhoe, dig a hole, lower them down on the sheet.
It might even be more hand dug, just because of the nature of
kinda-
it's.
Then fill it back up and call them home.
Yep.
The water in the pond.
There's no home phone number for mom.
The water in the pond there on 7th.
Yep.
Is, it seems like every spring, it also joins us on 7th and goes down the hill.
Yes.
Is that seen as a long-term maintenance issue, or is that that's the current management plan? And
We try to maintain that level. There's spillways, so all three of those ponds within the cemetery are hooked together. And so it's a balancing act to kind of keep everything. So we have spillways that we can release the water if it gets too high. This spring was an exceptional year. But typically we have to do that. But then it allows us to also drain them and muck them out if we need to, and then fill them back up. So it's the most internal one is spring fed. That's how it fills everything. So we're not using city water to do it. We're using the natural spring, and we just try to maintain it keep it as aesthetically pleasing as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on cemetery?
Thank you for reacting so well to the issue with green burial.
Not a
Being
problem.
responsive on that.
Moving on to page 95 starts the DPW, which is really the meat and potatoes of what DPW is, and encompasses so much stuff. You know, it's our parks, it's our streets, it's, you know, the sign crew. So really, this fund is managed by both myself and Scott, and I can speak to the park stuff related items, and then I'm gonna ask Scott to fill in whatever I missed on his end, is what he needs to cover. So 95, page 95, it starts. You go over to the fact schedule on the next page, just some program statistics. You can see a lot of the authorized positions in there. You can see it is a fairly large department. It's the home account for many of the employees, as we put it. And then when an employee who works out of 441 account, if they work at City Hall, they get charged to City Hall, but we had to have some place to land them as a home account. So that's what this account works as. Just some basic statistics regarding like park maintenance, things that the guys do out there, as well as the forestry as far as planting and pruning and removals. Moving on to the fee schedule. I do believe, Scott, did you have any changes on that?
Yeah, there's a couple things to mention with regard to the fee schedule. At the top there, you see the solid waste fees. And as we get to the solid waste fund, we'll talk more about that, but those still need to be revised based on what we agree upon on the contract modification due to the increase in tipping fees for the county landfill authorities' new recycling program and their new equipment out there. So those will be updated. You do see a few different changes as you go down with taps and things of that nature. Some of the changes are due to the fact that we are kind of going to more of an inspection role versus actually doing the work. So the people that have hired the contractor are actually performing more of the work now, and we are simply doing an administration inspection role, and that's why you see some of the prices. In addition to that, there's also a number of them that have kind of switched over to a minimum price, but they are charged actually what the bill comes out to for the service. And that's the majority of what the changes are.
Hi, my name.
No other questions on fee schedule. We'll move over to page 98, to the expenditures. Looking down the columns, we're fairly status quo. Really what this contains is, you know, our operating and maintenance budgets for, you know, for forestry, for sign crew, for parks crews doing out there fixing things, you know, whether it be a park bathroom or you know, a base or a field or something like that, soccer field. Some of the more noted improvements we plan on making in the next fiscal year. Hurley Field's gonna see some improvements. We're able to do quite a bit with the infield this year, which vastly helped play there. I know we got a lot of positive response from the users. We're looking to do a scoreboard and maybe some of the bleacher replacements, start working towards that to clean that up a little bit. We're also gonna do a Presque Isle building roof, which would be, I believe, the ice cream store. That's in need of repair, replacement. And then we're gonna put some money into our boardwalk. That's been a several-year project. For whatever reason, the boards on the boardwalk have been they have not performed like they should have. You know, for being treated lumber, they're very, they're rotten out already, and that's maybe 8 years old, something like that. So we've been going through getting the bad ones, but we're gonna redo sections at a time and make sure that it's safe for the public to use.
That's the boardwalk on the bog?
Down by the Hampton,
Oh, okay.
along the lake shore there. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just a couple of things. If you look at the middle portion of the budget there, the operating, repair and maintenance, and professional contractual, we didn't really change the dollar amount so much from last year because we did just reallocate where some of the items are. So if you add up the three columns from last year, the 3 rows from last year, they're about what they are this year. And then I'll also point out that similar to what the police department went through, we're looking at going through a accreditation process for the Public Works Department as well. And that's included under the 801.
Is that just a feather in the cap? I mean, good practices type accreditation?
It's really about best management practices, record keeping, and just trying to better the department, and, yeah, pretty much.
Good.
Does it help with grants, or does it qualify us for grants?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Question on 923 stormwater. How does that work? I mean, we're charging ourselves stormwater?
Essentially, yes. I mean, all the different properties pay a stormwater fee. You'll notice that for whether it's the service center or City Hall or any of those, they pay a stormwater fee. We actually charge our right-of-way. If you look at the local and major streets, they pay a stormwater fee.
Okay, thanks. Seems strange as all.
Will we see any improvements in the power number with the JCI project?
Yeah, is what we did for this year. We budgeted status quo, because we weren't quite sure what we were gonna see.
Wait and see.
Wait and see. I mean, that way, because we know that the savings are gonna pay for the project, that's the guarantee. So that makes sure that, we have the money available, and then Gary's gonna do the accounting at the end of the year. And once we get through this year to set our baseline, we'll be able to better budget for that moving forward. Just as an interesting note here, I looked into it, for an example, just to show you what it's done. Our bike path lighting, that's actually metered lighting. And, we have it, quite a few different circuits around town that light up the bike path, but we've seen an 80% reduction in electricity, so.
80%?
80%, yep.
Wow.
So that's,
Yeah.
yep, so that's pretty significant.
Efficiencies make your rates go up, right?
It's the name of the game. Is there any other questions on 441?
No.
Okay, moving along to 101-444 sidewalks on page 99. We'll start with the fact sheet. You can see we're essentially maintaining a 72-mile-long sidewalk system, and not a lot of change in the program itself. As we move on to the actual budget on page 100, just a little bit of kind of moving to doing a little bit more maintenance on some of the sidewalks as far as the plowing and things of that nature. Other than that, there are a couple of projects listed. This is where we locate the project for the citywide replacement program. And we also have every single one of the construction projects that Keith manages. All those are broken down, so if there's a sidewalk component to it, it's also included in this part of the budget.
Question, where does snow removal come? Are we just not there yet? Or was it inside?
Most of the snow removal would be with your local and major streets. So there's a small component for actually blowing roughly 20% to 25% of the sidewalks.
Yeah.
That's located here, but the major and local streets, we'll get to that soon.
Okay. Just I want to know, I heard about concerns about how things got plowed this year. And so, it was a big year, and that we had enough, and that we, just how that's all managed, just a background, just high-level background would be appreciated.
I have a question on sidewalks, and maybe this isn't the right area. I got a question recently about, the crosswalks, like in front of the Veerling, where there's the lines where cars are supposed to stop but don't necessarily. I had some requests to put like the flashing signs. Would that be under the sidewalks budget, or would that be somewhere else?
As far as signage, typically that's put into the major and local streets.
Okay.
So you're talking about something similar to what Northern has put on Wright and Lincoln when they had that?
Yes.
And then Presque Isle, I think they have it as well. Okay.
Not in that location, in other locations in town.
I see.
Fund 202, Major Streets, page 126.
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 126. In the third box down on the fact sheet there. Just a couple of typos. There's a missing 0 from the first line. It should be 43,000, not 4,300. And there's a extra 0 in the third line. Should be 2,500, not 25,000, and that put it more in line with the other facts that are there.
We realizing any kind of improvements or cost savings with the paint team that we've got going versus farming that out?
We're still working through the program. As far as what we're putting into it, it's still less than what we were budgeting on an annual basis for that portion of the work. We still contract out for the center line portion, and that still seems to be a very good value for us to contract that portion of the work out.
It was nice to get that done early in the season.
We're still working on it. As far as the traffic markings go, it's about a 3-year process to get through all of it. Last year was a little bit of a learning year as we got the equipment partway through, and we're trying to get things lined up and figured out. But they seem to be doing a pretty darn good job this year, so I'm pretty happy with the program.
Would agree.
Just working through the budget portion, you're not going to see a lot of changes, pretty much status quo. One change that we did make was with the winter maintenance. Based off last year, we did up that a little bit. Now, the question you had regarding snow removal last year, just from a high level, typically we switch to a partial night shift right after the Thanksgiving holiday, and then we go to a full night shift. It's typically closer to Christmas or right after. Once we are on a full night shift, they're essentially either plowing or they're removing snow at that point in time. One of the things that happened last year is we got a very high volume of snow in a very short amount of time. And although they were putting in a number of hours of overtime, as you can see reflected in the budget, it still was to a point where a lot of people were a little bit upset with the timeliness of it. And we had actually removed a good portion of the majors. And if you're not sure really on the difference between what a major street and a local street is, the majors are going to be your collectors and your ones with your higher volumes of traffic, your Lincolns and Washington and McClellan and all those streets. So we do kind of a pecking order as we go through. We typically take care of the business district because they have such a high volume of pedestrian traffic. At the same time, we're working on the school zones and along the hills. And then we move into the sidewalk route. As you can imagine, if you're plowing the streets and you're also plowing the sidewalk, the bank in between grows twice as fast as most other streets do. So that's kind of the pecking order, and then we move into more of the local streets. We actually got through the major portion probably about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks quicker than what we had in a few of the previous years, but we were working a lot of overtime to do that. When you get the high volume, yep, the local streets, they were getting fairly narrow. Our main focus was to make sure we kept them open, kept them wide enough for any emergency vehicles that would have to get down those roads, but, you know, we kind of kept just pecking through it at the, in the order we kind of discussed there, so. I don't know if that answered your question, or.
I feel like a real city commissioner now that I get to talk about snow removal. So, yeah, thanks. I'm all in now.
And I guess just,
I-
oh,
Kurt just mentioned something here real quick. You know, one of the things too, with regards to snow removal, we had 17 and a half acres at our old facility. About 4.5 of that was for snow removal. It was very, very centrally located. Losing that was a big hit to that operation. In addition to that, with us trying to work through the environmental closure at the Cliffs Dow site, that was another site that was lost for snow removal. So that has really changed things. We're moving a little bit more into outlying areas. We're working with the Flink Farm and the old dump ball field that was there for snow removal. We're working with the old tar pit, as it was commonly referred to, the old Superfund site that's owned by the BLP down 550. And we have also talked to the BLP about utilizing their sand pit, and they had given us permission to do so. Unfortunately, with the rate that the snow came, we weren't really able to go in there, and we didn't feel comfortable just going in there without having kind of marked out where we were going to plow the snow and open things up. I mean, we didn't want to hit anything and damage anything they might have had there or damage our equipment. So we will have that ready to go this year, but it has been quite a change for that portion of the operation.
Act 51 money, got that coming in?
Yep.
But you don't know how much?
It's all formulary, so
It's not here, is it?
well, it's in the revenue. And Gary, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the formula, or.
Yeah, so both Major Street and Local Street, which you'll see next, a large part of their revenues are set by a formula from the state. I don't have an example of it, but if you look at the 574 line, the state shared gas and weight tax, every time you go to a gas pump in anywhere in the state, the state taxes are sent to Lansing, and then Lansing divvies it out based on a formula which includes population and number of street miles and that type of thing. So using the formula that they gave us, we're actually going to see a pretty big jump from the current year to estimated FY20. The caution is, as we mentioned when we were talking about state revenue sharing on the first night, is if there's a recession, people tend to travel less, and so that could blow these projections. And we really don't know what we're going to get until we get it, so that's kind of the caveat there. But based on the state's recommended formula, this is how the majority of the revenues are coming in. There's also the snow allocation, which is the first line there, and that'd be in the Local Street as well. This is one there's a formula, and it's a double top secret formula that they don't share with anybody. It's really based on a rolling average of snow that you get. So not every community in the state gets a snow allocation, but probably pretty much everybody in the UP gets it, I would think. So it's based on this rolling average of snowfall each year, and plus the amount of dollars that are allocated to this fund. And then they have a formula that they divvy it out with, and we never know how much to budget for it. I call them each year, and they tell me whatever my best guess is, because they don't even know how much to budget for it. So when you see snow allocation in the budget, it's just the best guess, and it could, some years it's a lot lower, some years it's a lot higher. We just never know, so we just take a stab at it. And that's pretty much the same for both Major and Local Street. It's really formula based, one of which they share, one of which they do not.
So now that, go ahead. You're probably on.
I'm not planning on it, but
Usually, okay, because it's worked into the shared gas weight tax. That's basically what you're getting will be in there. Okay. I thought maybe there was more coming, you know, a nice little gift from the state. No,
that goes to Gary's private fund.
oh, okay.
Any chance you could put like a heated slab down or something to melt the snow better for you or something, you know, or then you could, pipe it to Kurt's office down there, the waste treatment plant or something like that, you know, or?
Just more treatment for him, might be more revenue, but.
So now that we're finally on the right item that I mentioned before, the flashing crosswalks, that's probably not something that we just stick in here, but I'm gonna ask city manager to maybe look into that. I say the one at the Veerling, I'm wondering if the traffic advisory committee has looked into doing those, if the money was allocated to them, maybe not necessarily this year, but it's a safety piece that I've seen in some other cities, so.
I can ask them to look into it. Do you have are you suggesting for every intersection or?
No,
What do you
for
have?
where it might be needed for safety. And
Yeah.
I say the one by the Veerling just because that's one that I know is an issue. Someone, the person who mentioned to me said one on Wright Street. I don't know where on Wright Street. Probably where there's more pedestrian traffic.
Yeah.
On major streets. I'm not talking on,
Right. Well, the white bars are where cars are supposed to stop.
yeah, they don't.
They don't.
I know, and that's probably gonna happen if we put those up, but it might be a little bit more of an indication.
I can make a note to ask the parking and traffic to
Okay.
look into that.
I would appreciate that. Thank
Sure.
you.
Another question on the revenue, the transfer in, the last item, 699? Are we paying ourselves for something?
No, if you recall from the first night when we were talking about transfers out from the general fund, the major and local street funds are two of the funds the general fund has to balance out, Lakeview Arena being the other one. So we don't collect near enough Act 51 money, and that's the money I was just talking about earlier. That's based on formula. That's based on Act 51. We don't get nearly enough to cover the operations for major or local streets, so the general fund has to pony up for that. And it varies each year, just depends on the amount that we collect from the state versus what we're spending.
So we're gonna put in $500,000 this year?
Based on the year-end estimate, yes.
What's driving?
But I'm
that?
not sure how accurate the year-end estimate is at this point. But for FY20, we're looking at 238,000, which is not uncommon for the major street fund. The local street is where we're usually doing over $1 million, $1 million to 1.1 million each year to fund that operation.
And can you say the budget was for 31,000, but we're doing 530,000.
Correct. That's based on, as Scott alluded to earlier, we anticipate by the end of the year, winter maintenance will have exceeded its budget by more than what we were expecting, and that's the biggest part of it. But really, all throughout the budget, you just kind of have to look at each particular area. And we also didn't collect. We only collected half of snow allocation of what we were projecting. So, when you add all of those factors together, it really kind of puts a ding into your budget.
So if we don't see, and now I am going to ask, I wasn't going to let this go though, this 1.8 million, is that the formula that was passed 2 years ago that's now finally going to go into effect from the state, or is that the proposed gas tax in the budget?
This is the most recent formula that they gave us, so it would be anything that's already approved. If there are other things in the works, it's not presented here.
Okay, so there is some legal certainty behind this number, though I understand it may change.
Behind the formula there is, but like I said, if people aren't driving as much, then there's going to be collecting less gas tax to spread out, so we could see a difference in amount there, but the formula will stay consistent. It's just the amounts going into the formula.
Okay.
Anyone else? Driving on?
Okay, we'll move to Fund 203, the local streets on page 130. This one is very similar. It's just essentially the other half of the streets. A lot of your neighborhood streets and that fall into this category. Not a lot of change. Winter maintenance is up a little bit from past years. Like we had mentioned with the sidewalks before and even the major street fund, a lot of the components of key three construction projects are listed out at the bottom, and they're included in the first section there, the 203-459 portion. And other than that, it's pretty much status quo.
So this year, we're transferring in 1.275 for local streets, and we're anticipating a little bit less next year, 1.239.
That is correct, yes.
Anything more? Drive on.
Okay, Fund 227, sanitation, page 135. This one, we're gonna turn into a little bit of a work session, if you'll indulge me. We, looking for a little input from the commission on this, and I'll let you know right off the bat that this is gonna have to get updated based on what is decided. As I mentioned before, there is a significant change in the tipping fees. And I'll pass out a handout here if I can. Pass that down to Mike and Gary. First portion of that you've already seen. That was the letter from the landfill authority just outlining what those change in tipping fees are gonna be. The next two are spreadsheets. And there's two different options really that we're looking at as far as how to incorporate the tipping fee changes into the contract. One is to just spread things out a little bit through all of the rates that are affected by it. And the second option would be to, instead of putting it into the rates for the drive-by service for the bag users, to put it into the bags. The simplest is probably just to place it into the rates. So it's just across the board. If you'll notice in the spreadsheets, the top portion of the spreadsheet shows you exactly what the rates are per contract. And then the bottom half of the spreadsheet shows you what their proposed changes are. What I tried to do is add on a little bit to the bottom of the first one, and what it shows you is the actual increase to our monthly bill that we pay for the hauling of the solid waste. And if you look at the total amount over the remainder of the contract, it's a little over $100,000, I think $107,000 that the tipping fee is going to change by, and that is roughly about $21,000 a year if you
Yeah,
average
Scott,
that
can
out.
I ask you to back up? We're a little lost up here.
Okay.
We see your spreadsheet, it looks great. Can you start over and point us in the right direction? And
Okay. So there's two parts to the spreadsheet.
Yep.
The top on both of them is exactly what the rates are for those different services.
Currently.
Per the contract right now.
Okay.
That's what I want some clarification on if I can. Drive-by service is the cans, 20-gallon bags, 40-gallon bags. So those are three different services that we offer for trash pickup.
So the drive-by service is for bag pickup.
Okay.
And then you have a 20-gallon or 40-gallon, I think it is there, whatever it's listed. Those are essentially the bags, the green bags you'd buy at the grocery store or gas station or wherever you purchase them. And those rates in the first option are steady.
So can
So
we
if you
break
look at
this down a little more before you move on? I'm looking at 10/1 of 2018 to 6/30 of 2019. So $6.70, is that how much it costs for a bag, or how much that person pays on their bill in a month?
That's the portion that they pay on their bill.
So that
The-
doesn't
the only-
include,
the only-
does not include the cost of the bag.
No, the $1.20 is the cost of the small bag, and the $1.50
Oh.
is the cost
So
of the
be
large
adding
bag.
those two together, or however many bags you use in a week.
However many bags you use,
Okay.
it's just per
Thank you.
bag.
I was getting
Yeah,
lost here.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. This is what you look at all the time. I know.
So we don't need to have a decision as we go through this portion of the budget, but I did want to pass it out and make sure everybody kind of had a understanding of what you were looking at, and then, yeah.
My monthly bill is $14.90, and I have bags. Where do I see $14.90?
Okay, so this is simply the contract portion. Okay, so there's a portion of your bill that has a collection for public works services as well as the rubbish drop-off. And that has to be added into this, but
That makes
make-
$14.90 then?
yeah, to make it as simple as we could for this is purely the contract with Waste Management.
Okay,
All
good.
those other services that everybody pays a consistent amount for, I left those out.
Okay, thank you.
So if you really want to do a comparison, for example, take the first line on the top for a given year or given time period there, and compare it to the first line going down. So like where you said 670. Okay, the yellow boxes on the bottom part of the spreadsheet are the change, and you'll notice that it's pennies for the most part.
The other half isn't gonna go up. This would be, the only increase would be from 670 to 674. Would be-
Every year, the public works portion of this gets calculated out per the budget as to what we need to do the rubbish drop-off site, compost site, spring and fall curbside collections of leaves and brush, all things of that nature.
Okay,
So does it cost the city more when we use the dumpsters? I mean, dumpsters are cheaper than the bags, but does it cost the city, does it, Waste Management, everybody can put more in a dumpster than you can in a bag, so does Waste Management charge more because it's more in the truck or something, or is there a difference price, or?
Well, they come up with a price, and this is all what they bid, so the top half is exactly what they bid. And there is a difference, based on they collect money for the service, plus they're getting money through the bags,
Yep.
if you're using the bag system.
Yep.
They're not getting money through the bags, because you can use whatever you want to place them in the carts. You could
So
use
by using the card, it works out to their it works out to them because they charge us obviously for the cart, so that covers their extra cost for more garbage or something like that.
If you're using about a bag a week, it was pretty close to a break-even situation between using bags and carts.
Two questions. Who uses a 64-gallon and 96-gallon? Is that purely commercial and business, or was that ever a residential cost?
Nope, those are available to residential as well.
Oh.
So all those different options you see as you work your way down, those are all different
Finally
card
gonna clean up
options.
the basement. No, sorry.
And one of the first columns there is the number of users, I believe,
Oh,
for
yeah,
each one of those.
I see, yeah. And then, thank you. Second question is, thinking with an equity point of view, so one of the things you have to be careful about is when you're always increasing fixed charges, you're hitting people who have less ability to pay, you're hitting them harder. So with this, I'm thinking about renters. So the drive-by service is paid by the landlord? Is that how this works?
It depends. It depends on who has the utility bill. So some rentals make the tenants put the bill
Yeah.
in their name, so they would pay it. Some include it. It all depends on the rental contract that they have.
Okay, and then, because I was thinking you can control the number of bags you're throwing out more easily maybe than this charge, which is, I think, essentially like a fixed charge. It might not be completely comparable.
If-
But I wondered why not increase the cost? I mean, the bags are staying the same for years. Like,
If-
why not bump that up a little bit? What was the
Well,
thinking?
that
I just want to
is-
understand the thinking.
That is the option that's on the second page, or
I see.
the third page in your packet, but the second spreadsheet.
Okay.
So you want us to tell you what?
If you would like the fee added to the bags, or if it's preferable just to add it to the monthly bills that they get from us.
I think it just added the monthly bill. I don't know why you'd want to discriminate and start to parse things out of it. I mean, it's a charge we all pay, it's a service we all use.
Well,
But you can-
it's into the carts and it's into the bag service regardless.
Yeah, I mean,
It's-
regardless, we're paying for the same service, so I would just bump it up for everybody.
But if you're using fewer bags, then you're not using the service the same.
At the end of the day, you're looking at, like I said, an average of about $21,000 a year. And there's 6,100 people or residences on this system. So you're looking at between 30 and 40 cents a year extra.
No matter what you do, somebody will be unhappy.
That's not what I'm saying, though, Fred, if I may.
No, not directed at you, that was directed at Scott.
Because I am concerned that we do this in a way that people have more control over what their waste charges are. That's a sort of fundamental to some of the utility, trying to keep utility costs fair for people who are on fixed incomes and people with less ability to pay.
You're going to end up paying about the same
Okay.
either way,
okay.
I think.
And then, back up, you were saying, with 6,100 people on the system and $21,000 a year, the number again was per person, the increase?
Well, you're basically.
The math you just did, right?
You're looking at about a third of a dollar, somewhere in there, so between 30 and 40 cents a year.
That's the maximum increase.
That's
Which
what you
would-
would pay extra, yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah, so then it doesn't, I think I'd still advocate to put it in the bags, but, although I guess, or do both, I guess, I don't see the harm in doing both. I mean, our costs are gonna go up over time. I agree with that, but then also I would put some of the costs into the bags.
If I could, just add one little comment that, I mean, our goal is we prefer to have everybody on carts. I mean, I think that's the way to go. By adding the cost to the bags only, you're gonna probably reduce the bag usage. But the catch-22 there is if you reduce bag usage, then you don't get the fee you need to cover this, so.
Thank you.
So I think it's safer to do it for all as opposed to just the bags. However, from our point of view, we'd love to see the bags less and less. But I'm not sure how to
If you can
get
find room
there.
for the carts in my garage, I'd be so appreciative.
I know, I hear you, I understand.
Scott, I have a question. When was the last time we raised this kind of thing?
Raised,
Like the rates for like bags or any of those things?
well,
And was it to
there-
the bills or was it to bags? That's
there's always been a yearly increase to the bills.
to the bills, okay.
Regardless.
Okay.
As far as the bags go, we haven't raised it now in quite some time.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that we kept it constant through the contract was simply because we were expecting to have more than one company actually bidding on it last time, which if you recall, we did, which was a positive thing. But in order to make sure that they were bidding apples to apples, we wanted a consistent bag price.
Okay.
That's why we kept it constant.
The reason I ask that is because I feel like if we're adding it to bills every year, and obviously that's cumulative over all that time, I don't have a particular feeling either way, whatever is the easiest, but asking that question kind of made me feel like it should be added to bags over carts. But again, like you're talking, it's very small amounts of money as well. So that's my only 2 cents.
Now, one of the advantages to working towards a full cart system is there is grant money available for that. It is within the state's plan as far as recycling and all that goes, so that's where they're throwing the money as far as that goes. But I think regardless of which choice is made, it's not going to have much of an effect. Like I said, you're looking at pennies in this particular case.
What is the recommendation of city staff?
At this point, I think I would just spread it across each of the bills.
With this low of an amount, I think we go with city staff recommendation.
And we're not making that change right now, Scott, right? We'd have to come back in the future when we actually make the contract, or renew the contract, or modify the contract, or is this
We're gonna have to modify the contract based on that
at some
that
point in the
spreadsheet.
future?
Yeah,
So, I mean,
we're looking at, we'll have to bring that forward between now and October 1st.
right, so you'll likely see all these numbers again then, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there
Right.
and
It's more of an FYI right now.
yeah.
And the actual decision will come when we ask you to modify that contract. And we'll make an official recommendation then, but I guess for the time being, for our purposes, it's easier to do it to everybody. But that's your call.
Just want to, I guess I'll weigh in. If the direction is to go straight to containers, I always thought it was weird to put, we're talking about recycling and putting less into the landfills, but we're double bagging all of our garbage, or, roundabout double bagging it with this green bag, red bag process. And I thought it was kind of ridiculous. Why are we throwing more plastic? One of the worst things that we could put into our landfills, because of a process that, needs to be refined. So if we're talking about containers, there's got to be some sort of incentivization for the customers that are still bagging it to, I was right on board to get the containers. That was great. I had a heck of a walk out to the end of the driveway in the middle of winter. I'd rather have a cart. So it's great to have that. I really do appreciate them. At the same time, I know that I was paying for those carts initially. If I'm not mistaken, you pay an upfront cost when you signed up for the carts, and then you pay a monthly fee according to the city's scale here.
Well, with the carts, the cost of the cart is incorporated into that rate.
Okay. So at the same time, I don't know if there's some, I realize on both sides of the argument here, it makes sense to spread it out over all of them. It would make sense to put a little bit more pressure on the baggers to get containers for an extra, but pennies wise, that's not the way to do it. So if there's some sort of, you got to show people a piece of green versus a piece of change, that's going to get them to switch over if that's really what we want to do. And, look forward to seeing some options in the future. But
When we started the process about 4 years ago, we had started with a pilot program just to see how it would go. And generally, the people in that pilot program, which I want to say was about 40 residents in an area over by Gray Street and West and that, I think, they're quite happy with it. We were hoping or expecting to have a little bit higher participation. We're probably at 20% roughly now.
20% are using carts?
Yep.
Gee whiz, what's going on?
If you look at the recent introduction of the carts out in Chocolate Township, their percentage was probably at least 3 times that. So,
I would point out that I think the reason I wasn't on the commission at the time, but the commission went to the hybrid system was because they wanted to offer choice.
That is correct.
Because there were a lot of people that wanted the bags and wanted the choice of being able to put out a comparatively small amount of refuse at a given fixed price. And that's what they did, and that's why the commission did it. So I would take umbrage with the idea of trying to do social engineering, of charging one more and one less, trying to get a predetermined outcome. I think that the folks need to have that choice. Our citizens need to have that choice. And if we eventually get there, we eventually get there. So, my 10 cents.
Yeah, and it's a space issue for, I don't know how many other people, but I mean, I just don't have room. And what the mayor said about, I barely fill it, we don't fill a bag. So, that giant thing, it's like, if I could put my bicycle in there somehow, but, no. And so, yeah, it's interesting, I really appreciate this conversation and this chance to think about it. And we can, it's good to get us started for, it's gonna come at us, it sounds like in the next 6 weeks, so it's coming here pretty fast, so I'm good for now.
Yeah, I think I've got enough information to go back and get a revised budget sheet to you for this, and we'll get that to Mike, and he can get that out to you guys.
Yeah,
And
look,
just
it's
go
good
from
to have
there.
a work session and then just talk about it more, because we want to look at raising another fee. I mean, electricity's high, water's high, and, you know, people are like, oh, I have to pay more for garbage now. Maybe we, you know, make a city a few more bucks. If waste management go back, you bid on waste management, okay, we absorb the cost of the increased tipping fees based on what, we don't know what the landfills, because you're still talking about they're gonna do the recycling center or not, but we'll see, I guess, like you said, wait and see what happens to the landfill, if they're gonna go through with their project, and
Well, they're moving ahead with the project. They're expecting it to take about a year. And I guess I'll just finish with the last comment that even though they're moving towards single stream recycling, we'll still be on a dual stream system probably for one more year because they won't be up and running until next fall. So probably about the time we have this discussion next year, we'll also be talking about potential changes moving into a single stream system.
get more information, because, I mean, the place my friend at the bins did it over garage, but they just leave them outside, you know. Yes, in the winter sounds good, but, I mean, I know people, narrow driveways, stuff like that, have a problem with that, but you said bins are nice to, if you don't fill them, they're nice to have, because she used to go through, you know, 2 or 3 bags a week. I said bins are much cheaper, you know, so, figured out when we go to that point.
Moving on.
Okay, Fund 283, road maintenance, page 152. This is kind of a sister account, I guess, to the one that Dennis had mentioned earlier. One contained 200,000 from Lundin on an annual basis, or for the safety improvements, and one contains 500,000 for simply road maintenance. And one of the recent approvals that you made was for moving ahead with a guardrail project that would be funded with the safety portion of that. So just to give you an example, and I think some of the other examples were, you know, paying the bonds for the roundabouts and the portion of Wright Street that was reconstructed, so. That's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions. Okay, Fund 540, fuel system, page 193. This is pretty simple fund. It's simply managing the fuel system that we have at the Municipal Service Center. You will notice there are a few other people utilizing that system, and there is a surcharge that's added on to every gallon of diesel and gasoline that's purchased through the system. Some of those are internal departments, like the motor pool. Some of them are AMCAB, Paul Township, NMU. So essentially what that surcharge pays for is the upkeep and maintenance, as well as kind of a perpetual care fund, replacement fund for down the road as well. Not a lot of change in this one at all.
Perpetual care fund.
Still kind of trying to see how things balance out. We did have Market Area Public Schools go away from the system. At the same time, we've added Northern to the system over a year ago, so.
I have a question on this, Scott. Not about Market Area Public Schools. I had sent something back a while ago that diesel prices are set to increase in January. Or projected to increase. I don't know if we're taking that into account in our budget or not.
So the way this fund works is essentially, we've got each department with a fuel budget. So any of the increases they budget for. This is simply a money in, money out account. So in the sense that if the gas price goes up, it's reflected in the price that it's sold to the individual departments
Okay.
or the other entities.
So in those individual departments, have we budgeted for an increase in diesel fuel?
We take a look at the, like the motor pool and that, and we're fairly consistent with the number of gallons that we purchase in a year, and we also have a little bit, of an assumption of where that price is gonna be in there as well. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is motor pool include police and fire? Okay.
Yep.
Wasn't sure. Looking at the
Yeah,
list.
motor pool includes all the city-owned equipment. Now, there are a few exceptions to that. There are a few pieces of equipment that are owned directly through the wastewater treatment plant, so. But other than that, generally just about everything's owned through the motor
Scott,
pool.
at the risk of wandering off into the woods, have you guys thought about electric vehicles at all, or any transition to that?
I have not. I don't know if Eric wants to dive into that one at all, but.
Yeah, we really haven't gotten to that point yet. I mean, that's something we definitely could look at in the future. Technology's been changing so fast.
I mean, yeah, it's certainly improving rapidly, and I'm thinking of especially small fleet stuff that's just local to the city.
It might be interesting the next time we maybe do a travel vehicle or something like that. Maybe that would be a good place to start something.
Oh, I never start with a travel vehicle, the range sucks, but I'm thinking in terms of.
Unfortunately, everything's light duty though right now.
I'm thinking in terms of pickup trucks or stuff that we just use around the city, that might be an interesting way as a
They're not
technology
there yet.
demonstrator for
I know the
somebody.
BLP has one, and it's horrendous.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not. Unfortunately, like the trucks aren't there yet.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
cars are better.
The cars I could see if it was like a travel, but
no.
but yeah, you're right. You don't want to be in the
Maybe
middle
where
of
we travel
downstate trying to
Yeah,
plug
no,
it in.
Ishpeming?
Yeah.
Hybrid city manager car.
Question on,
We'll lose them.
these people that are part of this group, the fuel usage, would you wanna kind of farm this out to anybody else? And I think like anybody with a fleet, would that be a benefit to us? And I think, Marquette General ambulances, something like that. I mean, is there any reason to, I just look at the group that's here and I'm saying, is there,
All our users are tax exempt
okay,
in this group, so I think if we tried to sell to a
Yep.
entity, I think that'd make it pretty difficult.
Makes
I don't know
sense.
how we could do that.
thank you.
Okay, moving on, Fund 555, Stormwater, page 195. I've got a little bit of this one, engineering has a little bit of this one, and Kurt has done a good part of this. So Kurt, I don't know if you have anything you want to talk about the rates at first, or?
Thanks, Scott. Unlike the next four accounts, budgets, they all relate about utilities. So I'd like to make some general statements. So the theme is really covers all of these utilities. So hopefully I won't have to say the same thing 4 different times. all the utility budgets, stormwater, of course wastewater plant, water and sewer. They are, they're being presented, recommended with utility increases as recommended by our rate consultant. Once again, we spent about a couple of years putting together a comprehensive 5-year financial plan to try and bring our utilities into the positive. Also with the goal of trying to start cash funding some of our capital improvement projects. Another thing that's been happening over the last year or two, the state has really, is per regulatory compliance, we need to have a balanced budget. In other words, the cost of service. So all water utilities, wastewater utility, sewer utilities need to take in enough revenue to cover their expenses. You've been, I'm quite sure a lot of people have, been around the state, the nation. Utility rates are going up for every community. Marquette's no different than Ishpeming, Negaunee, Escanaba, and part of the force of this is definitely the state's recognizing that there's a lot of communities that are neglecting their infrastructure, which puts a health and safety burden on the communities, the residents. So once again, this is the second, the budget is recommended with these rate increases as recommended by a rate consultant with definitely input from our city staff. And of course, I know commissioners when the presentation was done last year. So that's just a common theme as we go through each of the budgets. Again, the total, in a transmittal letter, in the budget, for average user with all 3 utilities, it's approximately $11.50 per average a month increase for those 3 utilities. So once again, it is the goal to try and, we're still in a deficit. I believe in year 2022 is when we'll start decline and start building up the reserve. So I just want to sort of.
What year was that?
I'm looking, I believe it's 2022. And we do plan on next year. We've got 2 things going with us. In the water budget, we have a professional contractual 3 years. I can wait till the mayor gets back if you want. Every 3 years, we have a water supply contract with the township. And by agreement, we need to have an independent rate consultant come in and then recommend a new charge for the following 3. Their 3 years is going to be up in March, so we plan on getting our rate consultant back, work with the township, and then that will be what we charge Marquette Township in the next budget. So just water.
Pumping water out to like Bishop Woods and that area or something like
Correct.
that?
Yeah. Anything that goes through a meter into the township. So that needs to be, and especially you're going to see a change what we charge the township because of the increases here. That'll be a positive.
So does it go
creeper.
directly to, like, areas in the town?
Correct,
Or
yes.
does it go like to another little like sub pump station that pumps it out to all the places in the town?
Yeah, it's within the distribution system. So they have certain areas, districts that use city water, that they don't have well capacity or well infrastructure.
So it goes to the township pumps it to wherever they need to.
Correct.
Basically like a fire station that pumps it, whoever needs to pump, they pump it to basically each one.
Correct. And then what I do plan on doing is getting our, as part of that, it'll be a city, we'll contract them to really take another look at where we are in projections with the revenue. So we get a better idea. We can do a much more detailed after a year of the budget. So that's just sort of the over thing of the whole budget. So, no questions at this time on, like Scott mentioned, on page 196.
Can I add one thing,
Sure.
Kurt? Sorry. Maybe it's gonna come out later, but we built this budget based on those increases being approved. If you recall, the rate increases have to come through a separate action on the, independent of the budget. When we're done with the budget, you will be asked through public hearings to consider raising the water, sewer, and stormwater. So just to remind you that as we progress through this, if by chance the commission doesn't support the increases we're recommending, it means we'll have to go back in and cut certain things out of the budget to make it balanced, just to make you aware. It's not, I don't mean that as a threat. I'm just saying that that's the reality of how this works, so, thank you.
How much was it again? 11?
$11.75 per, if someone uses 4,000 gallons of water.
Yeah.
That's water, sewer, and
That's
storm.
Page
total.
8 has a nice summary.
Yeah.
Page 8 of our book, page number 8, has a nice summary.
Yeah.
And if you recall, we have a 5-year plan. This is the second of a 5-year plan to get to a budget neutral position. And everything after the 2022, which Kurt mentioned, will then go into a reserve fund to actually help us support the infrastructure. In other words, we can, instead of borrowing money to do these, we'll have cash on hand to do our infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure maintenance and projects, which theoretically or realistically would release or free up money in the general fund that might otherwise be used. And that money could be used for other things. And just to reiterate a fact that, I mean, this is kind of being pushed by regulatory requirements through the Eagle and the DEQ. And it's still the aftermath, basically, of the Flint situation, where it was felt that municipalities were not keeping up with the proper maintenance of their infrastructure. And the state is really pushing all communities to get into this same scenario or same system of financing. And if I could be so bold, I think we're actually ahead of the game compared to a lot of other communities. I'm sure at the time when we bring this back for actual consideration of the commission, Kurt will have that usual comparison sheet that you see with other communities, right, Kurt?
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean,
Changing all the time.
we're, if you recall, what was it, just not that long ago, Escanaba had 60% because they were not doing it incrementally, and Chocolate Township just did a sewer thing last year, which was the same, so, yes.
Thank you for that gentle reminder. And my question is, I would think that these increases are probably also meaning that we're driving down water use.
Yes.
And so, taking that into account as well, as the rates go up, everyone in town is gonna try to use less
Right.
water. And would any projected developments, or like the closure of Shopco or something, they're big users, are they also changing their patterns, that kind of stuff?
Well, yeah, our consultant, to the best of their ability, factors in that effect, that probability that they're gonna put in water-saving toilets and water-saving things like that. That's kind of factored into what we're doing, and from everything I've been involved with Kurt in these discussions, that's the single most challenging part of predicting or setting yourself up for this. As far as others, yeah, when Shopko goes down, I imagine the water use goes down, but on the same token, when we add these new hotels and new subdivisions and new townhouses and things, that's gonna be more water use. So, and we have the volume, so that's about the only way we can, other than more extensive rate increases, the only way we can compensate for that lesser use is by more users, so.
We do a top 10, as part of the, and like I say, top 10, uses about 26% of our revenue. This is from 2018. And I went back to the archives and I looked, 2014, and at the top 10 were about 33%. So it's sort of interesting to see those comparisons.
By top 10, do you mean the top 10 users?
Correct.
Okay, because that's what was my, I think you did this last year. I think you did this last year too. You gave us the list of other municipalities, but also the top 10 not losers, users of how much they would be going up. Because I remember the biggest complaint last year was from maps. So I'd be curious to know how, like, those users, what their bills would look like. Residential, we have those numbers, but.
And just to add one thing to that, all of our larger users have been notified ahead of time. MAPS, for example, has been informed of the potential for this increase, and the university is aware so that they can properly budget it. And I think last year maybe they weren't prepared or as prepared because the rates were not explained or advertised, so to speak, ahead of time. Certainly the hospital is aware, and we
Have
try
we-
to get it out there.
Have we heard back from any of those users?
Yeah, well, I have. Yeah, I've talked to
Well,
both.
I'm just wondering.
I've talked to both the university and MAPS, and they're budgeted, is what they tell me.
And Whetstone Village is another one. I sent them the recommended rates about 3 months ago.
So can we, I mean, again, and I hate to keep kicking the same horse I was kicking last year for the first year, but it's all about the efficiencies, right? So Northern comes through, they build how many new dorms? Was it 4 or 6? 4 right now? So you go through and you get rid of 4 old online dorms. You get the new hospital, you know, all of those things are running probably, I would say, and I'm guessing, but I'd say probably around 25%, if not more, efficient with their new utilities. So all these things are going to be affecting us. At the same time, I think where you were going with it earlier was a point that I was trying to bring up last year, is that we're all being more efficient. So yes, we're paying more, but we're not paying as much as we could have if we weren't using the same
Yeah.
equipment.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not, yeah.
And even though I would imagine the metering process is going to make us more accurate, things along those lines. But all important things, you know, being in the industry of efficiency, it's so important for us to realize that we're creating our own problem in a good way, I think. We're going to get there eventually. We're going to be paying more all the time, but we're going to get there slower. So that's the goal.
When do we anticipate bringing that to the commission?
We wait until the budget's adopted, and then we'll have you set a public hearing, because these rates are set by ordinance. So
Have
we
a
do
month?
to do
Have a guess?
Public hearing. So if you approve the budget, first meeting in September, we'll ask you to set a public hearing in the second meeting, so probably the first meeting in October is when we would
Okay.
get it to you.
It's the last meeting before the election, that's how it was last year.
That's what it was last year.
Yeah, I well remember, it was the last meeting in October.
Well, we have 2 members termed out, so they can charge right on, right?
Do you give a quantity discount to large users? You know, the more you use, the less you pay?
Absolutely not.
No, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the only discounted is the Marquette Township, and that's done through the court-ordered water supply contract.
They can never disagree with what the price will be, right? Isn't that set by,
Correct, that's
determined?
it's set by a third-party
Okay.
consultant.
How long does that run? How many years?
3 years. And I went about 4 years. Time we got it, actually, it was 4 years. But I think with the changes in our utilities right now for water and the cost and everything, I've talked to the Township Public Works. We are going to get back on the 3-year schedule, so I hope to have by next March or April.
Is the prison one of the things we supply?
Yes, they are number 1.
I was, yeah, okay.
Oh, actually, water, they're number 3, and sewer, they're number 1.
Think of the irony here. We're drawing our water from almost an inexhaustible source, the greatest freshwater lake in the world. And yet we're charging more money for it than you possibly could imagine. Does that make sense? Yet we have major users out there that are conserving water, not necessarily because they want to save money, but because they think it's a good thing to do. That's the university
Yeah.
position on it, by the way.
It cost about about 64 per 1,000 gallons, and we charge about $7.17. So getting the water to the treatment plant and producing
Right.
it's getting it
To the house.
to
Yeah.
the homes.
No, it's all the infrastructure, I understand. Okay, let's move on, unless we have
Okay,
more things to.
moving on, if you turn to page 196, that's the first of the utility accounts, stormwater. As Scott mentioned, this is sort of an account that Public Works, Engineering, and I sort of play a little bit of role because I've been working with, through some grant opportunities. The revenue is, once again, that's a projection that we have, and of course, that includes the recommended rate increase, I believe 15.25%. As for the expenses, the main part of the expenses, we got construction, maintenance, administration. Construction is basically all the capital improvements projects that engineering oversees. And then now that we got all the stormwater, and this has probably been more of a challenging in the last few years, is maintaining our stormwater collection system. And Scott's department oversees that. Again, we're seeing more and more, maybe Scott could talk on it, but attention to some of the detail in how they maintain their stormwater. But really, at the end of the day, we've tried to keep all the expenses pretty stable. No questions if we, on page 197. This is the wastewater treatment plant fact sheet. We've, one thing I'd just like to acknowledge my staff, or our staff. We have a very seasoned staff. We're very fortunate. We have a lot of people that have been with the wastewater plant for, anywhere from, I think 18 years to 30 years. That's going to be a challenge moving on. So we are, as we bring in younger people, it does take time to really learn the process. So, but the staff does a great job, and just a lot of credits to the whole staff and the operation. And page 198, that's our fee schedule. We take a hard look at that every year. We try and break even cost of recovery. One thing we got to do, we do take trucked wastewater that you'll see when I go over the revenues. That's sort of unknown. We do get some LS&I floor drain waste. So we're getting some leachate from We Energies. But also, there's another couple plants that, might want to take it. So we definitely try to be competitive. But definitely cover the cost.
Maintenance expense.
That wasn't me.
Speaking of green barriers.
Put another WD-40 for the door.
Okay, moving on page.
Moving on, you got the hint, okay.
199. Okay, I start with revenues. Once again, the Marquette area wastewater plant is owned by the city of Marquette at 84%, Chalkeye Township 7%, and then Marquette Township 9%. These budgets are sort of zero-based, which means once we come up with the expenses, we then plug in the revenue so that the revenue covers all the expenses, and then a per unit rate is charged to each community. So that's the way the revenue and the way the budgets. So at the end of the day, the cost of operating the plant is charged to each of the communities.
They all so easy.
you'll see on the sewer page, that line item, under City Marquette, 2.935 million. That same number is in the sewer budget under wastewater services. But really, just, once again, we tried to, the budget's pretty stable. We're seeing a little bit higher cost in some chemicals a little bit. And then our 801 for professional contractual, we'll be at the last year of a biosolids contract. With a contract, I expect about a 15% increase.
Kurt, real quick, again, and I'm bringing it up continuously, but none of the JCI efficiencies that have been done in your facility were taken into account.
Yeah, correct. The budget is, right now, this budget.
It's gonna be wait and see, and then
a wait
hopefully
and see.
okay.
I think I was driving by your little office there on the highway. You're pumping stuff out of the plant into a truck, you had a couple tankers. Is that being transported to somewhere else to dump in a fill or something, was that, or?
Right. We generate about 1.8 million gallons of biosolids.
Yeah.
It's liquid gold fertilizer.
Mhm.
And then we have to keep the process plant running, operating, we have to remove approximately about 350 tons of it. And we do it in a couple different ways. We do agricultural farmland or hay fields. We do mine reclamation with the Cliffs Natural Resources. And then also we do a cake application, which is a different material, but for agricultural. So there's a lot of different ways we get rid of it.
So I know it's tankers, or
Yeah.
pumping into tankers is being
Yep.
brought wherever you're gonna bring it, depending on what you're pumping into.
And I just haven't been able to, one goal I had is to start selling it before I retire, so.
Get on that, Gary wants it in the budget next year, selling fertilizer.
So moving on to, the next two budgets are the water plant, or the water and the sewer. Page 200, the water fund is made up of a couple different components. The first one is the water filtration plant. On the fact sheet, we have, that's staffed pretty much one person every day, and occasionally, we also have, during the day, we'll have one other person there to do some maintenance. Yeah, the plant is operated 24/7. And then on fact sheet 201, that's really, that's water distribution. That is run out of Public Works, Scott's department. Again, a lot of the program statistics, these are basically what we're doing is we're maintaining a water system for the system. And the budget is being recommended is to maintain the current level of service. So that's one thing. It's very important that, when you do pay, your water, your utility bill, you do deserve good service, which I feel that the water department definitely provides.
At a high level, when we have to do the let runs in the wintertime, is that ever something that it just gets so big that it becomes a problem, or is that kind of inside the budget, there's allocations for that, and
Yeah,
it's never been?
Yeah, that is tracked internally. We know exactly how many gallons. Typically, someone is put on a let run. The meter, the billing, Christina, she'll take a 12-month average, so they are still charged for their average usage. So they're still paying for the water and sewer. We occasionally, at the plant, we do get additional water that we got to treat. But a lot of program statistics, we are required to do a lot of regulatory testing. The state is definitely adding on more and more of requirements for testing. One change, we're gonna have to do lead and copper annually instead of every 3 years. So that's something we're in the process of, we'll be doing this year.
Real quick question. Looking at your program stats for the gallons of water treated in your 2019, do you have any idea if that's in line, or is that just from last?
Yeah, that's the projection that we feel pretty good about the projection. And when I do the, I just completed, I got a 10-year chart that gives the average flows and for water and wastewater. We're staying pretty constant. You know, sometimes wastewater goes up a little bit higher with the infiltration, the high water table, so we see a little difference there. Fact sheet. The fact sheet on page 203, that's for, we offer bacterial analysis for anyone that wants to use our certified lab. We do quite a few of these for construction projects, not only for the city, but for the other communities. So we do have it's a pretty good revenue source. And moving on to the actual budget, operations budgets. First one is on page 204. Once again, the water revenue, as I sort of talked before, the recommended increase is built in for revenue. We do, again, what we tried to do is we tried to keep pretty stable expenses. A couple of the expenses that have increased were talked about earlier with health insurance. So that those have been a pretty big jump. But for actually operating the plant, we're able to keep pretty consistent. And water distribution, I don't know, Scott, if you want anything to point out.
I don't know if there's much to add. It's pretty consistent with that, and the capital outlay reflects the projects, once again, that are listed there in the notes section, so be pretty straightforward.
Once again, on the water fund, I do have under the notes, water joint rate study with Marquette Township. And that's split 50-50. Huh?
Mark's gonna get 60/40.
Someone else will be. So that's pretty much in a nutshell for the water fund. And now we get into, I call it the real clean water, which is the wastewater, because when we're done with it, it's very clean. Once again, on page 206, there's a couple components, funds as part of the sewer. First one is the wastewater pump stations. We've got 12 lift stations. Lift station actually is a collection point so that the wastewater goes to that station. They pump it to a different station, then eventually down to the wastewater plant. The wastewater staff maintains these. Our last major upgrade to those were in 2004, and then we did upgrade some of the secondary smaller stations over the last 5 years. But again, these operate 24/7, so they're very, very critical to maintain and make sure that we avoid any potential sewer backups. Page 207 is the sewer operations that's run out of Public Works Department, similar to the Water Distribution Department. Again, it's their job is to really maintain the 88 miles of mains, the manholes. So there's quite a bit of maintenance, preventive maintenance. I can't speak more importance of that. They're just trying to be proactive instead of reactive. I think we've had pretty good luck with sewer overflows, very few of those. And once again, I give a lot of credit to the Public Works sewer crew, because the work they do is just is pretty good. And then moving to 208 on sewer fund, sort of broken up similar to the as the water fund is. Operating revenue, once again, the recommended increase is built into the revenue of, let's see, that's 11.5%. And once again, it's pretty stable. I know one thing I've noticed when I was over at Public Works, a lot of times if we happen to have a winter that's very low in snow, we're able to do a lot of preventive maintenance with some jet rotting and that type of stuff. So that's sort of a bonus, that if there's a window opportunity, that really helps out maintain the system. Temperature-based too. Yeah. So for sewer maintenance, if you have anything to add, Scott? Okay. Wastewater pump stations, we keep that as a separate sort of a budget. That's sort of good to do, because to track expenses. Again, this is a very critical operation, because the last thing you want to have is a failure at a lift station at 2 o'clock in the morning, and deal with, you'll be on the front page if you have a failure. But once again, the wastewater plant takes care of operations and maintenance of those stations. So really, in a nutshell, the utilities, I think the city is very fortunate to have some pretty good, not only some above-ground facilities. That's a big selling point to bring in developers. That's one thing that people don't realize, that you got the facilities to treat your water and wastewater. So with that, I can entertain any questions.
I think your brilliant commentary has satisfied us all.
My last brilliant comment.
I think.
What?
First and last.
Oh.
Oh.
There's the intro apartment at the new apartments building, which is right next to your office, so you can still be on call.
No.
Thank you, Kurt.
There's already a reservation for you, so.
All right, moving on to the home stretch. I'll be quick but concise. Page 222, we have the Municipal Service Center Fund, which is an internal service fund. And the fact sheet there, we just have some estimates on maintenance. And the interesting thing about this being a new building is that it's not fixing stuff, it's mainly just maintaining things. It's amazing, what preventative maintenance you need to do just to maintain all these new fancy systems that are out there. Moving on to page 223, the expense side of it, as Scott kind of briefly touched on, the way the building's paid for is through rent. So every department that's in there pays rent. So whether that's dentists and community development and engineering, or the water, the sewer, motor pool, everybody pays rent, and that's what covers all the expenses for the building. Just going through, we did a pretty good job guessing at what it was going to be, because when we first brought that building online, we weren't quite sure what to expect, being a new facility, but we're pretty close to where we've been at. Just taking a look at just some of the costs, really, it's general maintenance, filter changes, things like that. Some custodial supplies, papers and whatnot. And then we also have some service contracts. We have an HVAC service contract and then a custodial service contract. So is there any questions on the MSC?
When did it open again?
2017, June of 2017 was the official completion date. It's like June 26th or something.
Bird services
Thank
and
you.
8-track, you know that, don't you? They've upgraded 8-tracks to DVDs, you know, and flash drives, but now with the Recyber's office I started, is that the county owned the building, where the jail is and all that stuff, and the courtroom is out owned by the county, or
Yes.
they give Gary money for taxes, or what?
All right, moving on to page 224, last one, motor vehicle, motor pool. We have the fact sheet there showing what we have for mechanics. You know, we have 6 full-time mechanics. One of those is being a welder, a purchasing guy, and a foreman. And I tell you, these are the guys, they're really kind of the heart and soul of what keeps the fleet working. They do an excellent job. We have quite a large fleet, because it takes quite a bit of equipment to maintain, you know, this wonderful city, and they do an excellent job. One of the things that you're gonna notice in this that's a little different this year is manpower. We were able to negotiate with, right now, just Marquette Township, but they're very interested in utilizing our personnel to maintain their fire department fleet and to pay us to do it. That allows us to expand, you know, services outside the community, do that intergovernmental sharing, but it also brings on an extra body for us. And, you know, the revenue that we bring in selling to the Marquette Township will offset the cost. And right now, we're looking at with just the township alone, we're gonna recoup about 50% of the cost of the guy, maybe a little bit more. And we have Chocolate interested in it, we have Negaunee, we have Sands Township. And oddly enough, Mike doesn't know this yet, but just recently, yesterday, the sheriff's department came in and wants to talk to us. So, you know, word's getting out, and is what really brings the people to us is that we have 2 mechanics that are fire certified in fire vehicles. Right now, all these other municipalities, they either have to bring their equipment down to Green Bay to get it serviced, or they have to pay somebody to come up here. You know, they come from, you know, Appleton or downstate, wherever. So, you know, it's cost savings the other municipalities. It brings revenue in for us. You know, it helps bolster, you know, having that additional mechanic. It'll really help what we can do in the shop and the amount of equipment we can maintain. And, you know, the great thing is that if done right, it's gonna be budget neutral, or even maybe, you know, on the positive side, maybe we'll be, end up a little bit ahead of the game.
You charge Mike extra for fixing his truck, or what?
No, he's free. So they're just kind of moving down through the budget. Really, we're fairly status quo. You know, the big thing that comes out of, you know, we have our maintenance supplies, we have our operating supplies. All I can say is things are getting more and more expensive. You know, nowadays it's about $10,000 just to buy a loader tire. It's just insane. That's why, you know, the prices are out of control. But, you know, like I said, we have such a talented group, you know, with fabricating and things like that. We're able to build a lot of our own equipment in-house, weldments and things like that. Some of the things that we're gonna be doing next year, maintenance-wise, at the bottom of the page, in our 775 account, we're gonna be doing some things with some dump box repairs. You know, a dump box right now, if you were to buy a brand new one, they're $40,000 each. You know, we're gonna be able to refurbish 4 of them for that price, and we're gonna get another 10 years out of them. You know, it's simple things like that, having the manpower that's gonna allow us to do things in-house, just to save money, to extend our fleet down the road. Another good example is the Vol. And we're gonna put about $24,000 into our 2 Vols that we have, and a Vol is that big snow blower that you see mounted on the front of the front end loaders that we do our bank cutting. And that's a $400,000 piece of equipment. I think as long as we can get parts for the engine, we'll keep that in perpetuity. 'Cause it's, you know, it's a solid piece, it's all steel, we can weld whatever we need to weld on it, and as long as, you know, we can keep the engine going, we're good. No, you know, but the thing is, all the new technology is all, you know, that further tier 2, tier 3 diesel emission stuff, and they're miserable to maintain. And then we have the advantage of having a little bit older equipment and maintaining it. So status quo really for what we're doing as far as maintenance and operations, you know, with the exception of those few little projects. But we'll get into capital outlay, and this is all part of the CIP. We got a couple of cop cars in there. You know, we need to basically replace just about 1 to 2 cars a year just to keep up with that. We have a fire inspector vehicle. And then we also added this year a what they're calling a fire echo vehicle, which is essentially a small SUV, and I believe Ian talked about it a little bit in his presentation, but we ran the numbers. Every time they take a fire truck on a run, it costs us money. They're expensive to fuel, they're expensive to, the tires, you wouldn't believe what it costs to put tires on a fire truck. Everything's aluminum on it, everything's custom made, it's just, they're just a cash cow as far as what they cost you. So by bringing on that eco vehicle, we're thinking we're gonna save anywhere, between $8,000 to $10,000 a year just in savings, just not running those large trucks up and down the road and still providing the same service to the community that the fire does. And then moving on into the heavier equipment, we have a plow truck in there at $350,000. That got cut from last year's budget. We were able to get it in this year. And then we have a municipal tractor at $180,000 is what that is the those units you see clearing the sidewalks. We use them for cleanup in the spring and the fall. Particular unit that we have is no longer supported by the manufacturer. They're gonna quit making them altogether. And while it's not necessarily a bad piece of equipment, if we can't get parts, it's gonna break, and then we're not gonna be able to maintain it, plus no one's gonna want it. So at least now, if we're ahead of the game, we're gonna replace it with a different unit and actually have some value when we go to sell it, and then we're gonna be better off down the road for replacing it now. So with that, is there any questions?
Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes our information gathering. Well, let me, well, thank you, everybody, for coming in and doing it. And it's a great opportunity to sit and really get a good briefing from professionals and get a good laydown of where we're going and how we're getting there and what our challenges are. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much. That brings us to public comments. Comments not to exceed 3 minutes per person. Please state your name and physical address when making public comments. I see no one public commenting, therefore public comment is closed. Comments from the commission. Commissioner Smith, anything? Schlegel, nothing?
Yeah, I got something.
Yeah, go for it, go for it.
It's way too early, it's your birthday, Happy birthday, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Again, I said it the other night during one of the other meetings, this is the nuts and bolts that keeps our city running so fluently, and I just want to say thanks for all your work.
Commissioner Campana?
Kurt, hate to see you go. This is it for you. Soon. But you got a good man to replace you, so thank you for everything. I'm not done yet. This is your last meeting, right? Last budget.
I'd like to point out that he's retired like 14 times already.
Well, he's still gonna be on call, right, Mike? According to Gary, he's still, just like all my friends who are retired firemen, they're still on call for emergencies because they're still getting paid by Gary through the pension, so you'll still be on call. So just so you know.
Commissioner Hill?
Two things, and yeah, thank you very much. You are the heart of what we do. Really, really appreciate all you do. Could the submittal letter that's on top of the budget be put up separately on the website? Because I think as an executive summary, it works really well, and that way you don't have to download 200 odd pages. Just pull it off.
That's designed to confuse people.
Exactly. I keep my RAM lean, and so my poor little machines are chugging away. So just if we could have that subliminal letter separate, and then I might. Where does the big Cliff Dow's project go? I realized that didn't get called out today. Is that?
It's in our capital improvement plan, and that's the one that we had the special meeting or
Right.
the work
Okay,
session on.
Okay, I'm just like, wait a minute. We're spending millions of dollars. Where did that go?
And that's in there, and that's by approving this budget, you're approving the match, the $3 million match for that was also presented during those special work sessions.
Okay, that was okay. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you again, everybody, and we'll be back here again, so next Monday, Wednesday night at 5 o'clock, 5:15. 5:15. Last and final. Take care. Oh, wait a minute. We're done.